Is this what revenge looks like? Alex Salmon launches a new political party. It's called Alba. It is, of course, pro-Scottish independence and throws a spanner right in the works for the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon.
Alba are hoisting a flag in the wind, planting our saltire on a hill. In the next few weeks, we'll see how many will rally to our standard.
He says he wants to build a supermajority in the coming elections for all those who want Scotland to break away. So does this help the cause or hinder it? In this latest twist, Peter will tell us all we need to know. Also on News at 10.
The lockdown is coming to an end. Such a long lockdown.
Families get ready for an ease of England's lockdown as COVID figures steady. Home truths from the women ranchers of Texas. As so many migrants cross onto their land, they tell Emma they feel ignored by the government.
I'm not even talking the whole ranch, I'm talking our yard. And our daughter gets scared because people walk up behind her on the trampoline.
Is that Asda price what a ruling on equal pay for its female staff could mean for all our big supermarkets? And the mother of all wind-ups in the Mother of Parliament. How they're changing 2,000 clocks this weekend.
We usually work out, we've walked about 7 or 8 miles just inside the estate, just making sure that, and I dread to think how many times we've been up and down a step ladder in those times.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. By Wednesday, it seemed that this was going to be a pretty good week for Nicola Sturgeon, cleared of breaching the ministerial code over the Alex Salmon investigation and a vote of no confidence defeated. She appeared to have begun to shake off the shadow of her predecessor. Think again. This afternoon, Mr Salmon not only threw his hat into the ring for May's Scottish elections, but announced he was launching his own pro-independence party, the Alba Party. Not, he claimed, to rival Miss Sturgeon, with whom he has fallen out so bitterly. Instead, he said he wants to build a supermajority for leaving the union. Unsurprisingly, that didn't wash with his former party. The SNP said Mr Salmon's intervention was more about massaging the ego of a man whose conduct has faced serious questions than helping the country.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
He's back.
Today, I'm announcing the public launch of a new political force, the Alba Party.
Alba, which means Scotland in Gaelic, is a new party led by the SNP's old leader. They are also pro-independence with one main goal: to pile on the pressure for Westminster to grant a second Scottish referendum.
Boris Johnson has already said no to the SNP proposals. He will find it much more difficult to say no to a parliament and a country.
The idea of Salmon working with the SNP is now unthinkable. When acquitted of 13 counts of sexual assault and abuse, he said there had been a plot to have him thrown in prison, formed in part by people in the party and the government he used to lead. He then went on the warpath against his successor, Nicola Sturgeon, accusing her of breaking ministerial code, which could have ended her career. She was cleared and hit back that his behaviour with women, while not criminal, was not always appropriate. The SNP are clear they don't want your help for this supermajority. It's going to be seen by people as Salmon versus Sturgeon.
This is much too important to get lost in personalities.
Mr Salmon, the SNP say they have concerns about your appropriateness to return to public office. Have you put any extra safeguarding measures in place for the women who will be working with you?
Some substantial women candidates will be coming forward, and that, I think, speaks for itself, Peter. As far as the SNP, well, again, according to my pledge of the Alba will be a positive campaign and we shall not rise to any negative bait.
Alex Salmon says Alba won't directly challenge the SNP, but he's using Holyrood's political system to attempt a pro-independence supermajority. Scotland elects 129 MSPs, one for each of the 73 constituencies. Alba will not be contesting these. But Scotland also elects a further 56 MSPs by region, 7 for each of the 8 regions, decided by proportional representation. That's where Alba is putting up at least 4 candidates in each region, including its leader. But the SNP is still not exactly welcoming their so-called independence ally.
You know, it's sad to see, because the only people that will benefit from the launch of Alex Salmon's new party are those who oppose independence.
Those unionist parties are hoping the mere sight of Salmon will put Scots off all forms of nationalism.
Instead of focusing on a parliament that's focused on the people's priorities, you have Alex Salmon and Nicola Sturgeon wanting to put their psychodrama first. That's just not acceptable.
The polling experts are now looking at whether Alex Salmon's party is a help or a hindrance to Nicola Sturgeon in this election.
The most immediate risk to the SNP of this tactic is that Mr Salmon ends up taking some crucial seats away from the SNP, and maybe along the way doesn't himself succeed in getting elected, or any of his other colleagues.
Having faced off 2 inquiries and a vote of no confidence this week, Nicola Sturgeon wanted a distraction-free election. But Alex Salmon's shadow reminds voters of the brutal allegations they threw at each other. And now they're both asking the public to trust them.
And we can speak to Peter in Glasgow for us tonight. Peter, I mean, where do you start with this? How successful is Alex Salmon likely to be, do you think?
That's the question that everyone in Scottish politics today is trying to get their head around. We know that in order to get any candidates elected, the Alba Party will have to get around 6% of the vote. And if we take Alex Salmon alone, his personal polling in Scotland just now would translate roughly to about 7%, enough to make a dent. The question, of course, is a dent on who? Now, if he is able to create this super majority for independence, as he says, he would need to get about 10% of the vote. That would completely blitz the unionist parties, the Tories, Labour, Lib Dems. About 70% of Scotland's parliament could be pro-independence. Then Boris Johnson would be looking at being flanked one side from Nicola Sturgeon, Alex Salmon on the other, formidable enemies. But on the other hand, Alex Salmon could end up costing the Independence Party's votes, with his party dividing the vote. And if he costs Nicola Sturgeon her majority, it may be that she is depending on him to prop up her government. And in that case, when Boris Johnson right now is setting up a union unit to try and save a union that is genuinely in peril, the unlikeliest of heroes could come along for him, Alex Salmon saving the UK.
It's quite something, isn't it, Peter? I know you'll be charting all this for us in the coming weeks. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on now, and the reopening of schools in England was always going to be the first big test of Boris Johnson's roadmap out of lockdown. Well, so far, so good, just about. Infection levels in school-aged children have risen, but only slightly and not enough to set alarm bells ringing. Monday will bring another reason for many to smile. England's restrictions are lifting to allow up to 6 people to meet outside.
Here's to this weekend being the last time for many families that a screen comes between us and our loved ones.
Hello! Finally, we are doing the meeting together. The lockdown is coming to an end.
Like families across England, the Maheshwaris in London are looking forward to Monday, when 6 people or 2 households are allowed to meet outdoors or in gardens and see their kids face to face.
It's been very, very hard for us, but for my kids it's been even harder. My son had his birthday and he couldn't meet his brothers and friends, which was like terrible, you know, celebrating your birthday alone.
In lifting restrictions, the government said it would be led by data, not dates. So how reassuring are the latest numbers? Overall, the COVID test results show how far we've come, from 60,000 testing positive each day in January to less than 5,500 a day now. But focusing on the most recent weeks, and infection levels are flat. One likely reason seen in today's numbers from the Office for National Statistics, infection rates in both primary and secondary school children rising slightly, where infection rates in most other age groups continue to fall.
I think that's what we expected when we opened schools. Schools are part of society. They're involved in transmission. Schools aren't the great accelerators of transmission some fear them to be. And the good news is we're about to close schools for a 2-week. You could call it a fire break. And this is part of the plan to tiptoe slowly out of lockdown. So I don't think we should be too concerned. We should be vigilant, however.
This evening, the Department for Education said it was reviewing its current policy to end mask wearing in secondary schools from next term. For the rest of us, meeting outdoors shouldn't lead to many new infections, but some experts are concerned people may bend the rules, especially if vaccination gives them false confidence. In reality, millions of over 50s still haven't had a jab. At this football club in Leicestershire, the ground's being prepared for outdoor sports to resume on Monday too. And it's more than just a game, of course.
I like playing the games, but I love being with my friends as well.
I think it's just like human contact, really. I think we've been going out doing exercises, but just us two.
Given infections are no longer falling, a lot depends on how carefully we stick to next week's new rules. If infections do rise, it could be the own goal that relegates further lifting of restrictions to later in the spring. Tom Clark, News at 10.
Well, the next stage of lifting lockdown in England will see non-essential shops reopen from April the 12th. Today it was announced that when they do, they'll be allowed to stay open until 10 p.m, 6 days a week. The government said the extended hours will help shoppers return safely. Meanwhile, in Wales, the rule to stay local will be lifted tomorrow. It means there will be no travel restrictions there for the first time since December. People will also be able to stay in self-contained holiday accommodation, and 6 people from 2 households can meet outdoors. But travel in and out of Wales will be banned for at least another 2 weeks. And thankfully, you can see more about the changes planned across the UK on our website at itv.com/news. Now, it was the turn of British politicians to feel the ire of Beijing today in the row over human rights abuses in China. After the UK imposed sanctions on Chinese officials this week, it retaliated in kind against 9 citizens, including MPs and peers, who have spoken out about the treatment of Uyghurs being detained in Xinjiang province. On a call this afternoon, Boris Johnson and President Biden expressed concern at China's actions, although those who were the target of them didn't seem too upset. They vowed to redouble their campaigning, one saying he'd wear sanctions like a badge of honour.
This is how China wants the world to see the region of Xinjiang.
This is a land of vastness and a common home to 56 ethnic groups.
But what's happening to the Uyghurs and other minorities who live there is starkly at odds with those images. Up to 1 million forcibly detained in camps and human rights abuses such as forced sterilisation. Raising those issues has now led to 9 Britons facing the wrath of the Chinese regime in a tit-for-tat imposition of sanctions. In turn, China's top diplomat was called to the Foreign Office this afternoon to explain what was going on.
We stand in total solidarity with the 9 individuals that were sanctioned today. It's not going to stop them, or it's not going to stop the British government speaking up about the industrial scale human rights abuses taking place in Xinjiang.
The man he'd summoned said his country had no choice but to retaliate.
The Chinese people shall not be bullied. We do not stir up trouble. But if others do, we are not afraid.
Those facing sanctions include 5 prominent Conservative MPs, 2 peers in the House of Lords, a barrister and a university academic. They've all spoken out about human rights abuses in China. And they say they won't stop raising the issue now.
I feel even more determined to work with my colleagues here in Westminster and around the world to ensure that we are providing a voice for the Uyghur people. And if we believe and if it is determined that a genocide has taken place, then we have to act as soon as possible.
The dream of a golden decade in relations between Britain and China, promised by a previous Conservative government, has long since faded. But it's far from clear in which direction those relations are now heading and whether this government considers China friend or foe.
I think we have given them mixed messages. In the integrated review, on the one hand, we say that China poses a systemic challenge. And on the other hand, we prioritize our economic relationship with China, implying to the Chinese government that the British government can be bought.
The glossy video produced by the Chinese today, a sign it's unmoved by Western criticism and prepared to hit back if Britain dares to toughen its stance again. Libby Vina, News at 10.
Protesters returned to the school in West Yorkshire today, where a teacher showed pupils a cartoon depicting the Prophet Muhammad. The scenes were calmer than yesterday, but those present were still not satisfied by the apology from Batley Grammar School. The teacher concerned has been suspended and is now reportedly in hiding, something the Communities Secretary Robert Jenrick said was very disturbing. Now, as we've reported all this week, a major challenge facing President Biden is the surge in migrants from Mexico. Today, it emerged that a 9-year-old child died trying to cross the Rio Grande. For those who reach the US, their journey can take them across the vast ranches of Texas. Emma's been hearing from the women who run some of them, who feel abandoned by the government. The number of strangers traversing their land has left them scared to let their children play outside, and yet they still care for the injured who appear on their doorstep.
For generations, the ranchers of Texas's southern frontier have lived in harmony with the border, often farming these barren lands with help from those who've crossed both legally and illegally. But that harmony is gone.
Our lands are being invaded. I feel like our government doesn't want to do anything about it. Who wants their mom to have an illegal alien come kick their door in and threaten them? I mean, it's horrible.
Shelley Mean's family were among the first to settle in Texas. A few dozen migrants would cross this land every week.
Come on. Come on.
Now there are hundreds every day.
Get up. Our fathers, our forefathers, our brothers, our husbands, they've all fought for our country and they've been on foreign borders, protecting those borders. I feel like the government should step in and send our military here to protect us.
This is what's causing the fear. The groups, mainly men who make their way through this harsh terrain, up 316%.
This is not how America should be. And there is no border. There's no border security. I mean, that's an oxymoron. How can you have border security when you don't have a border?
These women have been ranchers most of their lives. They're fearful of speaking out, worried they'll be targeted by cartels or further devalue their land. But they want to be heard.
When you can't let your kids go out into your own yard, I mean, I'm not even talking the whole ranch, I'm talking our yard, and our daughter gets scared because people walk up behind her on the trampoline, that's a problem.
Their lives are now spent fixing the damage on their ranches caused by those crossing, as well as looking after those who collapse along the way.
There's a real human side to this tragedy, and it's that people are being lied to. And we've had them crawl in our yard. We've had them die out on the road in front of our house. I had a young man come in the yard. He told me he was a nurse from Guatemala, and he was just sobbing. Took his socks off, and it looked like somebody had taken a razor and cut the skin off his feet. It was just flopping from the blisters in the wear.
She washes their feet, and there's a place in heaven for her.
These women don't object to legal migration, but they fear a porous border.
They need to continue working with the other governments to stop some of this. They can't just open our gates and let everybody come in. We're going to sink. We're like a little boat out in the middle of the ocean, and everybody's swimming to get on that boat, and we're all going to sink.
What's going to happen to them? Who's going to raise them? Who's going to educate them? Who's going to feed them? I mean, they're just here.
Their fear is tinged with anger and a determination that despite their isolation, their voices will be part of America's immigration debate. Emma Murphy, News at 10, on the US-Mexico border.
Extraordinary voices from Texas there. Now, Tanzania's former President John Magufuli was laid to rest today. The cause of his death still a matter of opinion. As one of Africa's most prominent COVID skeptics, his opponents are convinced that it was the virus that killed him. Hardly anything is known about its spread in Tanzania, though scientists have uncovered worrying evidence. Travellers from there were found to have the most mutated version of the virus ever discovered. Not that it appears to be of any concern to those enjoying the sandy beaches of the semi-autonomous island of Zanzibar.
As a COVID-denying nation, Tanzania is sailing close to the wind. It's a country that has buried its head in the sand, so tourists still come and play in it. The Russians in particular are taking the risk. This island, Zanzibar, is both accessible and, like the rest of Tanzania, restriction-free. It's a reachable haven, but not necessarily a safe one. The government doesn't want its dangerous hoax investigated too closely, so we had to pose as tourists. The place is virtually PPE-free. Masks are few and far between, and wherever you go, social distancing is non-existent. Coronavirus is a subject the people here are wary of.
Do I need to wear a mask here?
It's up to you. It's the way you believe. If you believe it's there,
okay,
maybe you can face it or not.
You're not wearing one.
He said God was on his side. Tanzanian President John Magufuli said that too. He ridiculed vaccines and testing programs. He practiced what he preached and was buried today.
It's almost a year since the Tanzanian government released any coronavirus statistics. Since then, official policy has been COVID denial. The consequence of that is virtually zero awareness among the people.
In the absence of facts and figures, the evidence we gathered about the prevalence of the illness was both circumstantial and anecdotal. On the right here is the late Tanzanian president. On the left, the vice president of Zanzibar, who has also died. But unlike Mr. Magufuli, Seif Sharif Hamad was no COVID denier.
This is his handwriting.
Yeah. As his nephew showed us, the island's vice president chronicled his dying days in his diary. His entries show that he and his wife tested positive on January the 24th. 4 days later, so did 5 members of his staff. They and his wife all survived, but he passed away mid-February.
Are you proud of your uncle that he told the truth?
Yes, very much proud. I know him. He's very bold, very straightforward. Never, bend the truth.
While people don't know how frightened of coronavirus they should be, there's no such knowledge gap when it comes to the government. When this opposition member protested against election results last October, his treatment at the hands of the police left him with 5 fractures to his leg and ankle. Now he fears government policy on COVID has cost Zanzibar dearly in lives lost.
It could be maybe like we are talking of several hundreds who might have fallen victims of the disease simply because of not taking precautionary measures.
These people have been dangerously misled, and if their new president doesn't do a U-turn and kiss goodbye to what we all know is a false negative policy, then the rest of the world might just give up and leave this country behind, no matter how beautiful it is. John Irvine, News at 10, Zanzibar, Tanzania.
Back here, thousands of Asda workers have taken a step forward in their fight for equal pay. Mainly female shop floor workers have been arguing that they should earn the same as the mainly male distribution depot staff. Today, the Supreme Court gave them its backing, meaning their case can move to the next stage. It's a ruling which could have repercussions for workers at supermarkets across the country.
Wendy Arundale organised events for an Asda store in Middlesbrough during the 30 years she worked for the supermarket. Her husband had a similar role in the distribution depot, but was being paid more.
Both of us did the same role, but he was paid more than I was. Yes, it annoyed me, it makes me feel a little bit cheesed off. Why should that happen? We're now in the 21st century. We should be equal. It's about time we were equal.
More than 40,000 store workers, mainly women, claim Asda unfairly paid higher wages to workers in its distribution depots, who were mainly men. And the Supreme Court's ruled they can compare the jobs for the purposes of an equal pay claim.
The court's conclusion does not mean that those claimants have won their equal pay claims. At this stage, all the court has determined is that they can use the terms and conditions of employment enjoyed by the distribution employees as a valid comparison.
The Supreme Court ruling paves the way for the next phase in this complex legal claim. Store workers will now have to prove that their job is of equal value to that carried out by distribution depot workers. And that's something the lawyers representing the store workers are confident they can do.
The roles are equally difficult. They are different, but the demands are really difficult. Ultimately, retail staff, for example, are customer facing. Distribution centres don't have to deal with that. How do you measure that? And ultimately, we think that it's time, obviously, that the value of the roles are taken into consideration.
Asda has responded to the ruling, saying, "We are defending these claims because the pay in our stores and distribution centres is the same for colleagues doing the same jobs, regardless of their gender. Retail and distribution are very different sectors with their own distinct skill sets and pay rates." This equal pay claim is likely to run on for years, but other retailers and supermarkets will already be considering what it means for them. Martha Fairley, News at 10.
Police have just begun to disperse protesters who've gathered at a Kill the Bill demonstration in Bristol. The crowd has grown to more than 1,000 throughout this evening, many standing or sitting near the police station where there were violent scenes on Sunday. Officers in riot gear are now attempting to disperse them. This was the third demonstration in Bristol against the proposed police crime sentencing and courts bill. Those pictures just into us. Now, there are celebrations in Wales and Scotland tonight. Wales have won rugby's Six Nations Championship after Scotland secured an incredible victory in Paris. France needed to win big against Scotland to snatch the title away from Wales, but even reduced to 14 men, Scotland stayed in the game and scored in overtime to claim their first win in Paris since 1999, in turn ensuring that Wales are this year's champions. Fantastic. And finally, rarely has the arrival of spring felt so welcome, the warmer weather ringing in the easing of the restrictions. This weekend brings a more traditional milestone in the countdown to summer when the clocks go forward. There's always one that gets forgotten, isn't there? And if you think it takes time in your house, imagine being responsible for around 2,000 of them, including perhaps the most famous in the world.
On Sunday, the clocks go forward, and while for most of us we've only got a few bits and pieces to change, it's trickier here in Westminster. There's not exactly a shortage of clocks here. And we've been granted access to the workshop underground in Parliament, where the task at hand is underway. With lots to do, a familiar face paid a visit to check up on how things are going.
Hello, Jackie. What are you doing in here? I love clocks. Yeah. Absolutely love them.
As you can see, the Speaker of the House is a big fan and can't get enough.
Oh, very impressed. And then if you just advance it by 1 hour for me, please.
He's a busy man with not much time on his hands, but that didn't stop him from changing one of the clocks here in the MP's only library.
I'm able to say, well, actually, you know that Pugin clock there? You're getting the right time because I put the right time there.
There's clocks to wind, you've done one yourself.
Marvellous.
Why does this matter so much?
It matters to me because I want to know about the experience of the people that make this place, excuse the pun, tick. Because it is about the people that go about every day, first thing in the morning, right through the night. Clocks will be being changed. So I want to meet those people.
You can't walk far in this historic building without coming across different clocks. There's one over my shoulder there, and there's another one over my shoulder just there. There are 2,000 clocks here in the Houses of Parliament, and each of them will need to be changed by hand over the coming days.
Here's the man who's responsible for that. He's Parliament's clockmaker.
A little bit of a wind.
Ian Westworth and his two colleagues maintain the timepieces on the estate, some of which are more than 150 years old. They'll now be working around the clock to make sure all of them, including Big Ben, are ready for Sunday.
We usually work out, we've walked about 7 or 8 miles just inside the estate, just making sure that, and I dread to think how many times we've been up and down a step ladder in those times, so it is quite a task.
The clocks here in Westminster are part of its history, and as we look to the future and enjoy that extra hour of sunshine, they'll continue to tick along. Shihab Khan, News at 10, Westminster.
Well, that's us out of time for tonight from me and all the team here. Have a lovely weekend. Good night.